Hello and welcome to FPL Mate, your best mate for fantasy Premier League content for the 2022-23 season. My name is Dan and today we're going to do my last video before the Game Week 1 deadline, excluding streams, of course. There will be a few streams, don't worry about that. But yeah, today's pretty much going to be a pretty chilled out video. I've basically run out of time to create videos with crazy graphics, and there's also something that I really just want to talk about today, and that is how I finished 243rd in the world last year. Now, this is not something I've really made a video on before. It's a kind of a great achievement, I guess, in my FPL career that I don't think I'll be able to replicate. So I guess this is kind of my one opportunity to actually talk about it and kind of just talk about how I feel I got there and how I feel like I made it to the next level in terms of being, you know, in the top ranks of FPL, which is obviously something that we're all really aspiring to do, aren't we? So yeah, we're going to talk about that today. If you enjoyed this video, please do leave a like. Please do subscribe if you're new around here. And yeah, we're just going to go through it all today. Okay, so this is where I actually want to start, and that is my season history page. A few of you guys might know this already, some of you might not, but I do not have a long history on FPL. I'm not someone who has been playing religiously for years and years and years. In fact, it's only the last few seasons where I've even completed a full season. And before that, and I'm sure a lot of you guys were just like me, you know when you make a team for Game Week 1, you play until maybe Game Week 5 or Game Week 6, and then you kind of get a little bit bored of it, and then you move on to other things in your life? That's exactly where I was at. So, you know, from playing as a teenager right and way until like kind of now, I guess. But yeah, you can see back here, ranks very, very low. 1.3 million, 1.8 million, 210,000. To be fair, that one I actually think I made it through most of the season because that was one of the first times I actually took it seriously, because I was in a work mini league that I wanted to win, and I won it, and I think I won like 70 or 80 pounds, so happy days there. But then after that, it went straight back to you know, I was out of the work league, yeah, I just didn't really play for years and years and years. And then it came to the 2019-20 season where I kind of thought, all right, let's give this a proper go. And I'm sure, like I say, a few of you guys would have this moment as well, where you just get to this season, you kind of think, all right, I think this is the season I'm actually going to really try and see what I can do. So I started following YouTubers. I started, you know, going on FPL Twitter and checking out what people were saying over on Twitter as well, using some tools and different stuff like that. And yeah, it went pretty well. So first season of trying, I suppose, 62,000th in the world. Obviously, it wasn't my first season. I did have a, you know, a good idea of how the game was played, but in terms of strategy and stuff like that, had no idea what I was doing whatsoever. And, you know, I finished the season okay, and this was actually the time I started making YouTube videos on FPL as well, because I really just wanted to make videos to kind of document myself trying to get a little bit better at FPL, I suppose, if that makes any sense. So the following season was my first full season on YouTube, the 2020-21 season, and as you can see, that rank is like, I mean, in general, that's okay, but, you know, from a creator, you do expect a little bit more, don't you? You expect a little bit better of a rank there, and it's certainly not enough of a rank to call yourself an FPL expert. And by the way, guys, I would absolutely never say I'm an FPL expert. I just don't believe I am whatsoever. You know, I just enjoy playing FPL, and hopefully I can, well, the goal was always to try and get better at FPL, and I think I have done that. But yeah, a bit of a nightmare season. It was, I think being on YouTube didn't help, because I kind of felt like I had to make entertaining content. I felt like I had to go along with the crowd a little bit and not do anything too risky, and I was kind of like trying to make safe, you know, crowd-pleasing moves, essentially, at many times. And also, I had a lot of injury problems that season. But I'm not going to try and make excuses for myself. It was just a bad season. Sometimes you have a bad season, and that's absolutely fine. Which brings us on to this season. So you can see a real transformation here of ranks, you know, to go from, you know, a player who just a few years ago was sitting outside the top million because, you know, obviously, you know, wasn't trying very hard, to starting to try a little bit, breaking into that top 100,000 for the first time, top 1% finish, which is, you know, a real achievement in itself. Right the way up to here, where I've had what most of you guys will probably consider my only good season, and that would be a completely fair comment, my only good season. But I do think that there is something to be said about that. And people will often say, oh, one lucky season, you know, you just got lucky for one season. I don't think it works quite like that. I know when you look at something like this, you look at an image like this, and it just like looks like, okay, there's just a bad FPL manager who happened to get lucky. But what I will tell you guys, and this, you know, some people might not like hearing this, but you can't get to a rank like that without, you know, without being quite good. I mean, luck can take you so far, but you do need to have a little bit of FPL knowledge as well to get you the rest of the way. And similarly, it kind of works the other way around. Having FPL knowledge only takes you so far, and luck will take you the rest of the way. So hitting like the top 10,000, for example, if you finish in the top 10,000, that's not necessarily because you made better or worse decisions than someone who finished, 200th. It's that little bit of luck is the difference between finishing 10,000th in the world and 243rd in the world, for example. And it goes the other way, first in the world. Can we say objectively that, or just assume that first in the world was first in the world because they made great decisions every step of the way? Well, yeah, of course there's a lot of that, but the person who finished 1000th in the world didn't necessarily make worse decisions than first in the world, but luck just carries you that extra mile. So I can't tell you how to finish first in the world. If we all had that answer, we'd all be doing it, right? You do need a lot of luck, but there are some other things that can get you to the top, the higher levels, I believe, that if you take those tips, you give yourself a chance of getting a really high rank. So let's go through those. So guys, just looking at my own FPL team as it is at time of recording, the first thing I want to say is go mostly template in game week 1. So let's start from the beginning of the season. Game week 1, I think you want to go mostly template. And when I say template, I mean the popular picks. But I don't just mean the popular picks, I mean the popular picks among good FPL players, because there are players here, like Bailey, for example, 14%, Neto, 18%, even Saka, he's like, what is he, 21%. There aren't super popular players, even Kane, 27%. Yes, they are reasonably popular, but they're not like super popular. But what I actually mean is popular players among experts, and which is a lot of the reason why I created my Asking 100 Expert series, I guess. I started that last season. I started that series of asking 100 good FPL managers what they were doing with their FPL teams, and from that we basically generated a list of players that were really popular among the best players, the best managers in FPL. And there was often big differences, and you guys would, if you saw my video a couple of days ago, my 100 expert video, you would have seen that there are some actually big differences between the kind of players that experts pick versus the kind of players that the general FPL player would pick. So if a lot of experts are picking one particular player, if 80% of and this happened to me last season, by the way, when I made my 100 experts videos last season, there was one player, and that was Antonio, who wasn't in my team at the time, but he was in about 70% of FPL Experts' team. So I thought, all right, that is high. That is higher than I thought it would be. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong here. I need to go check this player out. I need to, do a bit more research and see how he can impact in FPL and in that West Ham team. And sure enough, he came out absolutely trumps. He's, scored, several goals and a few assists as well in the first couple of game weeks, and absolutely sent me flying. So he was a really good pick in the end that I wouldn't have had if I didn't have a look and see what the good FPL players were picking in their FPL team. So yeah, sometimes you just got to question yourself a little bit, and if there is a player that a lot of good FPL managers seem to be going for, and you haven't really had a look at that player yet, I'm not saying just copy them, I'm saying take that player and think, should I go for this player? Is there a reason for me to go for this player? Why haven't I thought of this player yet? Let's have a look and see if it's worth going for them after all. When you're starting the season, I also think it's kind of important, and maybe less so this season, I guess we'll see, but to be fairly flexible. So for example, you can see in my team here, guys, that I have different players at different price points. So I have, my expensive defenders, but I've got a few slots here that can interchange, I guess. So Perisic at 5.5, for example, if that doesn't work out, there's lots of players at that price point. I can go up to, a 6 million Reece James. I've got 0.5 in the bank. I can go down to a Trippier. So if this one doesn't work out, I've got the option to go to many different players in that position as different options for my FPL team, as like using my transfers. Similarly, in midfield, I've got Saka, 8 million. There's loads of options at 8 million. I could easily make a trade there. We've got different price points here. We've got 5.5 million Neto. If that doesn't work, there's some other 5 million options or 6 million options that I can go for. And there's also, I can go up to 6, like Martinelli, for example, with the 0.5 in my bank as well. And then up front, we've got Jesus at the I guess cheaper, mid-priced forward price point, and then we've got an expensive player here. But you'll notice, particularly in my midfield and a little bit in my defense as well, but not as much, that the the different players are all at fairly different prices. The only kind of exception to that rule in midfield and forwards is Neto and Bailey are obviously fairly similar prices. But aside from that, everyone is at quite different prices, which means using just one transfer, I can pretty much hop to anyone. If I want to get De Bruyne, I swap out Salah. If I want to get Luis Diaz, I swap out Saka. If I want to get to Tony, I swap out Jesus. If I want to get to Martinelli, I swap out Neto. Do you kind of get what I'm saying? Like, so I'm quite flexible, I'm quite limber, and that allows me to move quickly to different players that I might want to get. But being template at the start allows me, to be in a situation where I'm certainly not going to start behind. I'm starting with the pack, and then I can start getting ahead of the pack with my transfer moves that I'm very flexible to be able to make. Speaking of making transfers, one of the things that I do when I'm making my transfers is I use underlying stats. And I'm sure you've heard other people say this, this term underlying stats. So rather than looking at just goals and assists, we look at a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, I know this is going to sound like, oh, you're just shouting out Fantasy Football Hub because you're associated with Fantasy Football Hub, but there's a reason I've been working with Fantasy Football Hub for so many years, and it's because I think they're the best at what they do. And this one tool in particular, I just use religiously. You may have heard me mention it before, and it's the Opta Stats tool. Now, if you prefer other tools, then that's completely fair enough. But this, to me, it just encompasses everything, and I think it's just so essential. And if you ask any top FPL manager, they'll all say the same thing: is that they're subscribed to a service where they have access to underlying stats, which are far more useful than just looking at who scored the most points last week, who got the most assists, who's got the most goals. That only tells you a certain amount. It doesn't tell you the full story, and underlying stats often tell you the full story. So just for an example, I mean, we can go through and have a look at anything here. So if we select, go just to look at forwards, for example, and we can set the price range to, we want to see expensive forwards only. So, I'll set like the parameters to, all players, I guess, like 8.5 million upwards. I want to have a look at the second half of last season. I don't care about this first half of last season. So we'll drag that to game week 38. We'll drag the start point to game week 19. Let's just do that there, and we'll we can do some other things. Hide low minutes players. We can have a look at more results. We want to get a better idea, and we can see out of the more expensive forwards last season that Kane scored the most points. That tells us one thing. We can get that from the FPL website. I mean, if we do enough maths. But I mean, you couldn't tell it by the game week range. But what we can do is we can narrow this down even further. And what I like quite a lot is expected points. So if you go by expected points, it gives you kind of a better overview of their kind of players' actions and stuff like that. We can change the parameters to different things as well. So I can change we can go to per appearance, for example, or per start, or whatever, up there. And you get a really good idea here. So we can see Harry Kane now, 4.13 shots per game. We know that's a lot of shots per game. 2.7 shots in the box per game, over a big chance per game. This is a lot. We can see that this, compared to all players, it's a lot. Even if we expand this to all players in the whole of the Premier League, you're going to see again, here we go, that Kane is pretty much on top for expected points out of all players in the game, all positions, all prices, which is quite crazy. He got slightly less points overall, but expected points takes things into consideration like expected goals. Did he, underperform his expected goals? Is he getting a lot of chances? And that tells you so much. People may look at Kane in certain situations and think, oh, he didn't score last game week. But if he had 3 big chances, then maybe he was just unlucky to not score in that game. And next week, even though he didn't score last week, maybe he's going to do a lot better. So having this real in-depth data in front of you is just so useful when you're trying to figure out, okay, I know what the scores were, but what were the actual stats? Who is taking the most shots? Who is making the most key passes? And there's all kinds of other stuff that you can use on this Opta Stats tool that is just super useful. But it's just catered specifically for FPL players, which is why I love it so much. It has everything I want in one place. So I suppose add over. If you want to go check out Fantasy Football Hub, then there is a link in my description. Full disclosure, when you sign up, I do get paid when you guys sign up to Fantasy Football Hub via my link. But like I say, I would not be promoting a product or gassing the product up this much if I didn't genuinely love it. I don't really have a graphic or anything to show you for this one, but another thing is to watch more football. I found that last season I was watching way more football than ever before, because although stats are so important, and some people will tell you, you can play FPL by just looking at stats and never watching a single game of football, and that is technically true, but I found that watching more football really helps so much. You know, every weekend I will watch every single game available. That takes up a lot of time when, you know, we've got midweek games and stuff, but when I'm doing some work, you know, editing some videos, making some graphics or something, I'll have the football on no matter what game it is, and we can just try and consume a bit of football. And then when we get a little bit closer to the deadline, what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll watch not just highlights but extended highlights of games, because there's some things that stats don't pick up as much. You can kind of get heat maps and stuff, I guess, with the stats as well, and you know, they're on Fantasy Football Hub, they do have heat maps and stuff, but sometimes it's really useful to actually watch the context of the goals and see what the kind of positioning of players are they, why didn't they score a goal, you know, what's going on basically. And by watching these games and watching extended highlights, you can learn so much about players, and you can, you know, identify a player and you think, man, that player is going to get some FPL points soon. I can see it. Or you can look at a defense and say, you know, this defense, nothing is getting past this defense today. They're looking really organized. They're getting on really well. They've made a change maybe where they're looking much better. And by identifying these kind of aspects fairly quickly, you can get ahead of the crowd, if you like. And that is a huge part of getting a really high rank, is getting ahead of the crowd, knowing what players are good before everyone else knows that they're good. So yeah, that's a big part of it too. Now, I know I said earlier that you want to probably go fairly template at the start of the season, and I do think that is true, but you do also probably need to start integrating risks into your team at a certain point, and like I said, getting ahead of the crowd. And you can find a lot of what kind of risks you're going to take. You can work out, you can look at like underlying stats, who has got really good underlying stats. If a player is taking a lot of shots, then they're clearly pivotal to the attacking, you know, move of their certain team. Even if they're not scoring goals, if they're taking a lot of shots, that's just often a sign that goals are coming, for example. Watch games and stuff. But if you see a player that is looking good, and no one else is really picking them, no one else is really talking about them, so what? Take that risk, go for that player, and just see what they do. I mean, for example, last season, you know, it doesn't even have to be because you've watched them play. Last season, I made a couple of moves where I think I went quite ahead of the crowd quite early on them, and it kind of paid off. And that was players like Reece James. He did really well at the start of last season when he just come back from injury, and not really many people are talking about him. He had a 1-pointer in the game week before, so you know, most people are just not going to touch that. He's just come back from injury and he's just got a 1-pointer. Why would I want a player who's just got a 1-pointer? But it's not about looking at the past and how many points they got necessarily, but seeing the potential of the future of a player. And I thought Reece James, if he's fit, if he's 100% nailed on when he comes back, and I believe it was after international duty he was going to come back, let's give it a go. Chelsea's fixtures were good. We all have already seen that Chelsea were playing with high attacking wing backs. Let's stick Reece James in and see what he does. Similarly, the game week after, I brought in Chilwell as well, because the game after, Chilwell looked really on it as well. So we then had Reece James and Chilwell at a time where they were scoring loads of FPL points. We did the same thing with Raheem Sterling. We went on very early on him because he was having a great, he was looking really good. People always thought Sterling, really risky pick. Don't touch Sterling. You know, he could get rotated, but he was playing so well. He was Man City's best player at the time. So I thought, you know what, let's take a risk on the rotation and then see what he can do. Bowen, going early on Bowen, saw a lot of potential in him. So yeah, by using stats and by watching football games, you can identify these players that most people will say, oh, that player is risky. And I'm talking about these players like take a risk. You're taking a risk in terms of ownership, but what you're really doing is you're getting ahead of the crowd. You're identifying players that look really good before anyone else has realised it. That is so important when it comes to getting a good rank. You can't be behind. You have to be ahead of the curve constantly. But then on the other end of the spectrum, it goes the other way. So if you take a risk on a player and it doesn't work out, and this is something that I learned last season, which was a major difference in how I approached last season. If something didn't go well, I just took the L. I just said, okay, I'm going to sell this player. We don't need to keep this player. If a player is not working how you expected them to, they're not playing in the position you expected to, their form has got worse, whatever, if it's not working out, you can't just sit there and say, well, you know, I picked this player for a reason, let's just see how it plays out. take action. If you're happy to take a risk, you have to be happy to reverse the risk, not be too proud and go back on it. And this happened loads to me last season as well. I'd bring in a player, would be a risky pick to try and get ahead of the curve. As soon as it didn't work out, you know, I did it with Mahrez, for example. I brought in Mahrez, I brought in Foden at a time as well, thinking, okay, right, I think I've seen something I like in these players. Let's get ahead of the game here and go for this player nice and early. And it didn't work out. So I had to sell this player and I got off them early. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is that they pick a player, they bring him into their team, and then the player just stays there. People think, oh, I only just brought him in, I don't want to take him out. But if the player has not performed for, you know, even 1, 2 game weeks, 3 game weeks at a push, they need to go. They need to go. So you can't hold on to players. It's just, there's no point in waiting for them to come good when there are other players that you could potentially jump on. So as long as you're happy to take risks, you have to also be prepared to cut your losses when things don't go well. On the other end of that spectrum, I suppose, is captain. So for captain picks, I just go really safe. I pretty much go, unless there is a player who I genuinely think is going to massively outscore other players, I am pretty much just going safe on captaincy every single week. And if I do think someone else is going to outscore them and do better, if everyone is going for one captain, I'm probably not going to bet against that one captain. The time to go for the risky captain picks, and there are specific times, it's where people are unsure. So say there's an example game week, you know, game week 2, we're expecting that the captaincy split will be really, really, you know, a real divide between people captaining Salah and people captaining Haaland and people captaining De Bruyne maybe. So there'll be like a 3-way split on captaincy in that game week. That is the time to take a risk, because the worst that can happen if it doesn't go right is, you know, you'll lose out a little bit. But if you go for a differential captain on a game week where 90% of people are going for Salah and you don't captain Salah and Salah outperforms your player, then you are in real deep trouble. So the time to go for risky captains is when nobody really knows who to captain, and the time to go for safe captains is when, you know, there is a clear favourite captain. Go with the clear favourite captain. And I guess my final tip is just to trust yourself. And I don't mean this in a kind of a sentimental way, you know, always trust yourself, trust your guts, trust your instinct, because I don't think that's necessarily true. What I mean is that if you have put the work in, you've put the research in, you've watched a lot of football, you've seen a lot of things you like, and everything is lining up, and you've got a particular player you want or a particular player you don't want, then, you know, back yourself. You will not imagine the amount of times where I will get, you know, people in my YouTube comments saying, oh, I can't believe you're picking this player, they look like a terrible pick. But if I know in my heart that I've done the research and I can justify my pick, then I'm going to stick with it and just trust myself. And, you know, when you kind of have other content creators, you know, and I will get things wrong all the time myself. If another content creator says something, and I will do this throughout the season. At one point, I'll do this throughout the season. You know, they say something and you kind of think, hang on, is that right? Is that true? Is that true? Don't just copy other people. Don't just follow other people. It's possible for me, other people to be wrong. It's possible for me to be wrong. Obviously, it's so obvious. I'll be wrong 100 times this season. Don't worry about that. But if you think I'm wrong, if you think someone else is wrong, don't be afraid to go against them. And if you have other people making comments, and I've had this recently, particularly with Harry Kane, people constantly, when I've got Harry Kane in my game week 1 team, people are saying, I can't believe you're going for Harry Kane. He doesn't score in August. When actually, when you look up the stats, over the last 4 seasons, he's scored in 3 out of 4 of the last first months of the season. So, you know, it's actually not true. So if you've done your research and you know something's not true, don't buckle into the crowd. Don't buckle into what other people are saying or your friends are saying or whatever. Do your own research. And if you are happy with what you've got, you come up with, then stick with it. But at the same time, you know, if it looks like everyone is doing one thing, it's at least worth having a look at why everyone's doing that one thing. And if you still disagree, then fair enough. You know, if everyone is going for Harry Kane and no one's going for Haaland, or the other way around in my situation, because everyone's going for Haaland, I'm going for Harry Kane, it's my responsibility to have a look at Haaland and have a look and see, have I made the wrong decision here? Is there good reasons to go for that player? And then after that, we'll come to a decision, and that's exactly what kind of what I did. But there you go, guys. I suppose that's the last tip. How many tips was that? 8 tips? Yeah, maybe that will help some of you go from like a good level of FPL to the next level, I certainly hope that I can replicate some of these things that I kind of did last season and bring them into the new season. I could go on about all other kinds of things like chip strategy and stuff like that, but I think we can save chip stuff to later on in the season because we're not going to be touching our chips anytime soon. Oh, one more quick tip. Be adaptable and be flexible. I think that really helped me last season because I kind of approached the season with no prior season biases, I guess. I was happy to be flexible and treat the season as an individual season rather than depending too much on previous season strategies. So every season is a new journey, and just be flexible. This season, for example, everyone's choosing defenders and not many midfielders or attackers. That's new information. Just because last season or a few seasons ago the 3-4-3 formation worked doesn't mean it's going to this season. There you go. There's a bonus tip for you. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed what you saw today. I know it wasn't, you know, an amazing, graphically awesome video. Just me sitting down and chatting. Like I say, there's been so much content I've been making recently. I just don't have time to spend, you know, hours and hours and hours making graphics for this one. But hopefully it was okay. Yeah, please do like if you liked. Please do subscribe if you haven't done already. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on some of the deadline-related streams that we'll be doing today. And I'll see you later, mates. Bye-bye.